Annastacia Palaszczuk has overseen a government with significant achievements in creating jobs, in delivering frontline services, and investing in significant infrastructure from the Cape to Coolangatta. She's restored a strong and stable government to our state by bringing rail manufacturing back to the Queensland regions, by investing in cross-river rail and creating hundreds of thousands of local jobs through investment in critical infrastructure in health and in education. In 2020, she faced her greatest challenge yet, keeping Queenslanders safe during a pandemic that nobody could have predicted and the likes of which hasn't been seen in more than a century. Queensland has come through the worst of the COVID pandemic better than nearly anywhere in the world, but it's not due to luck. It's because our government put the health response first and planned carefully for our economic recovery. Annastacia and her government kept Queenslanders safe and our state strong. Please make welcome the Premier of Queensland, Annastacia Palaszczuk.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Can I start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we gather and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging? Can I acknowledge the Deputy Premier, Stephen Miles, the Treasurer, Cameron Dick, all of my ministers that are here today. I think there's assistant ministers and there may even be some of our MPs. Can I acknowledge Julianne Campbell, our State Secretary, Zach Beers, the Assistant State Secretary, to members of the business community that are joining us here today, along with members of the union movement. Well, welcome to the traditional post-budget lunch. It's sort of like fixed firmly in the calendar, and I know that I look forward to coming here and speaking to you every year, as does the Treasurer. And we're lucky this year, 2 in 1 year. So we had the election in October, we had the budget in December, and that was fun, just before Christmas, and then of course today. But look, I thank everyone for coming today. It's great to see you all here, and you know me, it's an inclusive government I lead, and what you say and what you think, your partnership with government is really important, and I've made it very clear to my ministers that we can't do our job unless we're out and about engaging, and that's why you see me take the cabinets across the length and breadth of Queensland, making sure that we understand the issues that are relevant to all people, no matter where they live in our great state. And as Julianne said, you know, what we've seen over the last 14 to 16 months with COVID, it has brought our state significant challenges, and my main priority is to keep Queenslanders safe. And the fact that we've had a strong health response has meant that our economy is roaring back, stronger, faster, better than any of us could ever have imagined. And in fact, the ratings agency S&P said yesterday, and I quote, "The state's early success in containing outbreaks has supported a stronger economic and fiscal recovery than otherwise would have been the case." And as you heard from Jules, we've been very measured in the way in which we deliver our budgets, and we are the first of the big economies that will reach that surplus in 4 years' time. And I want to thank the Treasurer and all of his team. That is something that I could not have possibly dreamt about, but it's a reality, it's happening, and the economy is just going from strength to strength. And you'll hear more about that from Cameron in a short time. So in relation to the budget, it's, I'd like to term it a traditional Labor budget, focusing on things that matter to Queenslanders, especially when it comes to health, education, housing, but we're also making sure that we look after the more vulnerable in our community as well. So there's over $6 billion there in concessions for cheaper electricity, rent and transport. But I think health is the signature issue here, and I just want to pay tribute to all of the people who've been working across Queensland day in, day out, not only doing all the testing for Queenslanders, building our hospitals, working in our hospitals, but but now with the rollout of the vaccine as well. I mean, never before have we asked a workforce to do so much, and they've stepped up and they are just meeting every single requirement we ask of them. With over 12,000 people vaccinated today, it's our highest daily rate, and those numbers are getting up. And I think there's going to be a really interesting discussion that we'll have to have in the future, and it's happening at National Cabinet as well, about, you know, when people are fully vaccinated, what is that level you need to be able to travel, what countries. I mean, there's a whole lot of issues still that are happening globally. It's not safe to open up at the moment, but when other countries reach a certain level of vaccination, there will be a push for businesses to get going and to make sure that they engage and get the supports that they need for their respective businesses. So in our health, it's a record health budget, 22.2 billion. And of course, there's our 2 billion hospital building fund. But just to give you a quick snapshot, what's happening across the state, it includes expansions and redevelopments in Caboolture, Ipswich, Cairns, Atherton, Thursday Island, Serena, Mer Island, Gold Coast, Hervey Bay, Maryborough. 7 new satellite hospitals we're going to be building in the next 2 years. I've cracked the whip there. They've got to get built so people can get their services closer to home in Bribie Island, Caboolture, Brisbane South, Pine Rivers, Gold Coast, Ipswich and Redlands. We've committed to a brand new hospital with partnering with the Mater, a public hospital in Springfield, which is absolutely needed. But we're also getting on with the job and upgrading and providing support for health services right across the state in areas such as Camberwell, St George, Morven, Charleville, Blackwater, Windora, Mowra, just to name a few. So big state, and families need the very best health. Then of course another record education budget. I know Minister Grace is very excited about that, $15.3 billion. And we're going to be doing 10 new schools, 5 in the Ipswich area, 3 in Logan, 1 in Redland Bay, another on the Sunshine Coast. Plus we're upgrading a whole lot of classrooms across our state and backing in kindergarten, and plus all of our frontline services that are needed there as well. And our state's a growing state. You'll hear from the Treasurer. A lot of people are moving here. It's really interesting, coming from Melbourne, Victoria, New South Wales. And they're actually settling in some of these growth areas as well. So that's where the infrastructure's going, especially health and education. So we're catering for that growth as well. The Deputy Premier and the Treasurer and I are very excited to announce the Jobs Fund, and the Treasurer will talk a little bit more about that, designed to turbocharge our job creation in Queensland. And I think one of the signature issues there that the Deputy Premier is very proud of is that we want to start manufacturing vaccines here in Queensland. I just think that is going to be a game changer for us. At the moment, the acceleration of the vaccine program is due for the last quarter of this year because we're dependent on the supply coming from the federal government. We know that they're just doing some final checks on Moderna. There's going to be a lot more Pfizer. Of course, there's AstraZeneca. But that's really going to be important for our future about making vaccines on our home territory here in Queensland. Then, of course, tourism has been hit hard with the shutting of the borders, and I absolutely support the shutting of those international borders. And over that time, we have really backed in the tourism industry. And even though it wasn't, the Treasurer didn't talk a lot about it yesterday, we have been talking a lot about tourism ever since we've been in COVID. And our first economic stimulus package was supporting the tourism industry, over $860 million. Our campaigns, such as, the Good to Go campaign, Working in Paradise. I think we've got something like 7,000 people wanting to move here from other parts of Australia to work in Queensland. You can't blame them, can you? Look, honestly, where else would you want to go? Queensland, it's the best place on the planet. But our tourism sector is really starting to recover because we're backing each other. A lot of people across Queensland are exploring places they've never seen before. In fact, the issue we have at the moment is a work supply issue, is about actually getting workers to go out west, to go to regional Queensland, to go to Cairns, to go to the Gold Coast, to go to Brisbane, around Brisbane, actually help with the tourism sector. But it's something I'm really proud that we've invested so much money in that sector, and imagine what's going to happen down the track. I'll get to that in a moment when we talk about a little event that might occur in 2032. And yes, not just for the state of origin, better result next time, but the winner was Townsville. Wonderful to see that state of origin held up there. But we also announced another signature program, which is our $2 billion investment in renewable energy. Look, the market is here. The market wants to invest, and we are providing the groundwork to do that. We're going to invest $2 billion, and it's going to mean that we will reach our 50% renewable energy target by 2030. And Mick de Brenny's doing a lot of great work there with the Deputy Premier, but also too, hydrogen is a game changer for this state. It's a game changer for Australia, and I want Queensland to be front and centre for that. We also know that out in regional and rural Queensland, water is a big issue. So we've made sure that with our $70 million for our Building Our Regions Fund, we're actually saying you must spend that money on critical water infrastructure. It is a big issue for councils. I see Greg Hallam clapping there, but that $70 million is dedicated to ensure that the councils can access that. And it might just be small works or medium works, but it's absolutely critical that they get that. So we've listened there. Now, the next biggest big investment, of course, is housing. There is a lot of housing stress out there. There are issues around homelessness. This is a big issue, and we're going to be putting $1.9 billion towards social housing. Over the next 4 years, we are going to build over 6,300 social houses right across Queensland to ease the demand. There is nothing more important than having a roof over your head, and this is critical, and it's also going to mean jobs for the construction industry and jobs for our tradies right across the length and breadth of Queensland. And our First Nations people. We need to recognise more our First Nations people, and part of that future fund is $300 million towards our path to treaty. Our government is incredibly proud of this initiative, and I hope it's one that everyone in the broader community celebrates as well. And then finally, we might have more to say about this later, but we're on the cusp of Queensland's greatest golden age, and that is next month in Tokyo. We will find out whether or not Queensland will be awarded the 2032 Olympics. So a lot of work has been happening behind the scenes. I've lost count of how many meetings Sterling and I have been to with the Olympics task force. I think we're up to about 14 or 15 at the moment. They're hours we're never going to get back, but they're absolutely worth it. But this could mean decades of investment for Queensland, opportunities for trade. It will put Brisbane, Queensland firmly on the international map. It is the world's biggest event. It does not get any bigger than the Olympics, and we are over the final hurdle, and we can see the finishing line, and we just need to close the deal at Tokyo. So look, I thank everyone for your support for coming along today. It's wonderful to see you all. Please remember that we have an open door policy. We want to continue to engage with you. We believe that the best place to be is Queensland, but our greatest asset are our people. And every single Queenslander has stepped up, and the fact that our economy is going so well is because of the work that every single Queenslander has done. I cannot be more proud. Everything I've asked Queenslanders to do, they have done. It just surprises me to no end that people will put others ahead of themselves to make sure we get the right outcome. And when you look at what's happening around the world, where the hospitals are actually being inundated, or people can't even get into a hospital because of COVID, that people can't leave their home, that they can't go to work, they can't go on a holiday. Look around you here today. over 400 people, your businesses are operating, your kids are going to school, your families are getting the health services, you're able to go on holidays, and you're able to enjoy each other's company. There's no better place than right here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Premier, and it's easy to see why the IOC are looking so closely at a Queensland Games when we have such a passionate advocate and champion for our state at the helm. I'm delighted now to introduce you to the Treasurer of Queensland, Cameron Dick. This is the Treasurer's second budget since taking on the role last year. In the budget he handed down yesterday, the Treasurer has continued the Palaszczuk government's record of strong and stable economic management, demonstrated economic recovery, and an unexpected surplus to boot. The budget continues to deliver on our economic recovery plan, and the forecasts and figures prove that that plan is already starting to work. It also highlights our state's comparative economic growth and reduction in unemployment as indicators of Queensland's leading economic recovery status among other Australian states and territories. But don't take my word for it. Let's hear more from the Treasurer himself. Please join me in welcoming Cameron Dick.
Well, thanks very much, Jules. It just seems like yesterday I was here talking to you. In fact, it was 6 months ago, but who's counting? How lucky am I to be delivered 2 budgets in 6 months? Very lucky, actually, because I've got the great privilege of serving in that office, and thanks to the Premier and her leadership and her guidance through COVID, we were able to be re-elected and have the great privilege of serving Queensland again for another 4 years. Can I acknowledge we meet on the land of the Yagara and Turrbal people and pay my respects to Elders past, present and emerging, as I acknowledge all First Nations people who join us here today. Can I acknowledge the Premier, the Deputy Premier, my Cabinet, ministerial and parliamentary colleagues. Can I acknowledge all the guests here, Jules and Zach. Can I also thank Alison and EY for their sponsorship today and her partners, a great business, a great international advisory firm that has been so valuable and important to what we've been able to do in government, and I want to thank Alison for that. Friends, thanks for joining us this afternoon for this presentation on the 2020-21 state budget. As the Premier said, this is our next step in economic recovery for Queensland. Our economic recovery plan was released last September. It's a plan that has seen Queensland bounce back faster than other parts of Australia and faster than other parts of the world, and frankly faster than we could have hoped for 1 year ago. Our Queensland economy is only succeeding because we've been able to protect the health of Queenslanders. And by getting the health response right, our economy can recover and grow, and we're seeing that recovery happening across our state. Queensland is leading the nation in economic growth and job creation. Workforce participation has risen 4.7% since May last year, and household consumption is up 3.3%. They're both indicators of a growing confidence among Queenslanders, both to look for work and to spend in our economy. Dwelling investment is up 18.4% since the March quarter of 2020. And at a time when international migration has all but ground to a halt, we are the biggest recipient of net interstate migration. We welcomed a net 30,000 new Queenslanders last year, and the Commonwealth expects us to receive, as released in the federal budget papers, another 85,000 people over the next 4 years. So that was a population the size of Gladstone that came to Queensland last year, and a population the size of the city of Rockhampton that will come to Queensland over the next 4 years. But as the Premier said, why wouldn't you want to move to the best state in the best nation in the world? But as also has been observed, this has been not because of luck, and it is no accident that we are succeeding. Queensland was the first state to declare a public health emergency for what was then simply known as a novel coronavirus in January 2020. So before COVID-19 even had a name, it was declared a public health emergency in Queensland, and that was we were the first jurisdiction in the nation to do that. We were the first state to unveil a range of stimulus measures to help affected sectors, And we've been the first state to recover all the jobs that were lost due to COVID-19. Not just recover them, but add an additional 55,000 jobs. They're not all the same jobs, not all the same people, and not all in the same place. And the path out of COVID still has a long way to run. But this budget demonstrates that we're well placed to grow the jobs, the infrastructure and the services that Queenslanders need. As I said in my budget speech yesterday, none of us like budget deficits, but Labor will always back jobs. If that means borrowing to build and borrowing to create jobs, we will do that every single day of the week. Our government made a deliberate decision that we would put our budget into deficit and it would stay that way until our economy had recovered. We've seen the damage that budget cuts caused previously to the Queensland economy. Cuts to services, cuts to jobs, and the sale of assets had a depressing effect not just on our economy, not just on our budget, but on our people. And while deficits will continue, they'll be reduced over the forward estimates. And by 2024-25, I'm pleased to say that we are forecasting the Queensland budget will be back to balance with a small operating surplus of $153 million. And as the Premier said of the Big Four, the federal government, the Victorian government, the New South Wales and the Queensland government, we are the first government that is publishing a return to surplus. It's important that we continue, of course, to provide Queenslanders with access to skills and training opportunities to prepare them for the jobs we are creating. And the Premier's right, there are labour force constraints across the Queensland economy, which is why we're continuing to fund our signature projects, our signature programs, Skilling Queenslanders for Work. 3 out of 4 people that have gone through the Skilling Queenslanders for Work program, introduced by the government in 2015. Three out of 4 of those people have gone on to further employment to get a job, or they've gone on to further training. And when you think we've created 300,000 jobs since our election, our employment program, Skilling Queenslanders for Work and Back to Work, have created 60,000 of those. It is one of the best programs in the nation, so we've locked in $320 million over 4 years, and then we're putting $80 million a year into the base of the budget going forward to give those Queenslanders who want a job a chance. I'm also pleased to say that as at May 2021, more than 31,000 women, so half of the participants in that program have been women, and I'm very pleased that we made that deliberate decision to support all people in our Queensland economy to get training, work and employment. We're also continuing to support apprentices and trainees, continuing our 50% payroll tax rebate for businesses taking on apprentices and trainees for the next 12 months, investing in TAFE, $100 million to continue our Equipping TAFE for the Future program, $47.8 million this year, projects at Robina TAFE, the Training Centre of Excellence at Rockhampton, the Trade Training Centre of Excellence in Mackay, and the Bundamba Metal Trades Manufacturing and Robotics Centre. We're also continuing to invest in our renewable energy training facility down at Pinkenbar, $23 million project. It'll be completed this year, and that will provide skills for 75 apprentices, the Sparkies of the future, to assist electricians get into the workforce in Queensland. And of course, we'll continue to deliver our $20 million Hydrogen Training Centre of Excellence in Beenleigh. So a training centre focused on renewable energy production, a training centre focused on the hydrogen industry. So making those investments very early to make sure we've got the trained workforce our state needs for the future. Of course, one of the ways we create jobs is through infrastructure. Infrastructure grows the economy, connects communities, and it creates valuable construction and maintenance jobs. So this budget this year will have $14.7 billion in infrastructure. 61.2% of that will be spent outside of Greater Brisbane. That's almost 30,000 jobs that will be delivered outside, direct jobs from our infrastructure spend. We'll continue to deliver our $50 billion infrastructure guarantee, something we announced as part of our economic recovery strategy. We locked in our budget last year. We're delivering again a $52.2 billion investment in infrastructure in this budget. And if I can leave you with one figure that you will remember today, there's a lot of figures today, $110 billion. That's what our government will have invested in infrastructure over the decade in Queensland to 24-25. And when you see and listen to some of those ads happening around the country at the moment, the federal government saying they're investing $100 billion over a decade for the entire nation, I reckon $110 billion for our state is a pretty good investment, and we always back infrastructure as a Labor government. And that includes water projects, completion of the Cairns Convention Centre, $176 million project, building our regions. We've heard about that. Works for Queensland, great project with local government, great initiative. The Horton Pipeline Stage 2 in Townsville, and $100 million for our Betterment Fund to strengthen infrastructure so it is in a better state to withstand natural disasters, and that's a nation-leading project as well. A record investment in roads and transport infrastructure, $27.5 billion over 4 years, supporting 24,000 jobs. Investing in regional roads in particular to respond to growing population with a focus on economic productivity. The Bruce Highway, the backbone of our economy in Queensland, one of our economic arteries, our nation's road that leads from Brisbane to Cairns. Funding includes upgrades to improve safety, flood resilience and capacity. And in the southeast corner, improving links between Queensland's fastest growing areas to ensure better outcomes for existing residents and new residents. We're welcoming to Queensland. 1 point we'll make our contribution to the $1.5 billion Coomera Connector, the second M1, which I think will start turning the sod next year to get that going. Minister Barney's done a lot of work to get that going. $75 million for the duplication of the Mount Lindesay Highway. $900 million for our capital program to help trains run better, upgrading stations as well. Ongoing funding to the Gold Coast Light Rail, an absolutely transformative infrastructure project on the Gold Coast that was a vision of our government as well, and $1.5 billion in this budget this year for Cross River Rail, 7,700 full-time jobs, 450 apprentices during construction. As the Premier said, we've got our Making It for Queensland Fund, our Queensland Jobs Fund, $3.34 billion, which includes an investment for renewable power production as well and renewable energy projects. So that is a significant investment. That's about creating a jobs pathway for the jobs of the future and the industries of the future, but also leveraging private sector investment. We've made that a really significant part of what we've done as a government since our election, particularly our Advanced Queensland Industry Attraction Fund, our Jobs and Regional Growth Fund. That's leveraged thousands of jobs across Queensland and $2.5 billion in private sector investment, and we want to turbocharge that, take that to the next level. And the Premier, the Deputy Premier and I announced a little while ago the Translation Manufacturing Institute, taking that brilliant world-leading science, taking it from the bench to the boardroom and business and then out to the bedside, making sure we can take the science, create value for businesses and companies here, particularly startups, and then keep that intellectual property in our state, making products including vaccines for the future. Of course, the Premier's announced our support for vulnerable Queenslanders, $6.1 billion in a range of concessions. Of course, just on Saturday, Minister Di Farmer, the Minister for Small Business, announced our new small business strategy, and that includes a number of significant investments to grow small businesses, to provide grants to small businesses, $7 million in our budget to support the live music industry in Queensland. They've been doing it tough, so $7 million over the next financial year, and continuing to fund a fair process for security of payment in the building industry. Investments across Queensland in our regions, as you've heard, 61% of our capital works project. New and upgraded regional hospitals, almost $500 million there. $300 million to maintain and improve and upgrade regional schools. $200 million towards the inland freight route, the second Bruce from Charters Towers to New South Wales, the New South Wales border, and money for drought preparedness and emergency drought loans, about $70 million. Supporting the front line, again, one of the signature commitments of our government, supporting police facilities, vehicles and essential equipment, our fire and rescue service as well, more money for maintaining cyclone shelters, and of course protecting one of the single biggest and most important and precious assets in our state, the Great Barrier Reef. So that includes $270 million to protect the water quality in the Great Barrier Reef, a new $500 million carbon reduction fund, drawing down on that fund to support our land restoration fund over time, so locking in $500 million, the income of which will be used to support land restoration and carbon sequestration in Queensland, and then money to support our waste management and resource recovery strategy, turning waste turning trash into treasure, taking waste out of the landfill, creating 3 times as many jobs and supporting business growth as well. So, as you can see, our recovery from COVID-19 is well underway. Our success in maintaining and protecting Queensland from the virus is now delivering a dividend for all of you. It's a dividend to Queenslanders for all their hard work, their strength, their tenacity and their resilience in responding to this pandemic. And that dividend is coming back, bringing back all of those jobs. 253,200 jobs we've created in Queensland since May 2020 and leading the nation with net interstate migration. Investing in the essential infrastructure that our state needs and the infrastructure jobs, building the better roads, schools, hospitals and all of those essential services that Queenslanders need. And of course, maintaining our commitment to high quality frontline services, jobs and infrastructure for Queenslanders. So as the Premier said, the future is looking very bright. I was heartened yesterday. It was a grey morning. It almost started raining. And then when I stood up to deliver the budget, the skies broke and the sun started shining. And as the Premier reminds me, and in fact I don't need to be reminded, you can have a look at the Premier's Instagram feed, there was a rainbow across the Parliament. And the big rainbow ended up with a big pot of gold in my office. And there's a little bit that I'll give back to you as well. So thanks, friends, for being here today, and very much thank you for what you've done to strengthen and support the Queensland economy. Thank you.
Well, friends, please join me in again thanking both the Premier and the Treasurer for their thoughts today. In a moment, we'll have an opportunity to hear more from the Premier and Treasurer about how this budget will continue to supercharge our economic recovery going forward. And they'll also be joined by EY's Chief Economist, Joe Masters, for a panel discussion shortly. But until then, join your mains and we'll hear from the panel in one moment.